Last week we introduced you to our extended family, which illustrates the diversity and some of the changes in family life in Britain today. There's nothing extraordinary about this family, except when you come to think of it, all families are extraordinary in the complex ways they arrange their affairs in order to survive. In this episode of our saga, we talk to the Benjamin boys about being sons and stepsons, about their relationship with their father Joe, and how it changed when their mother died, and later how they came to terms with their new stepmother Pauline Crabb. But first I asked Pauline about her decision to marry their father and to take on a new teenage family. Now then, when you met Joe, was it hard for you to relinquish your role as father and mother?
Oh, definitely, very hard, and I thought very long and hard about it, and Joe helped me to think. we worked it out together, but it was difficult for me because I had had 10 years as in the role of mother and father to Biff, and it was extremely difficult. And just the thought of moving into his house, that had also been Rivka's house.
His first wife?
His first wife, and you know, it was hard to do that, to sort of give up the flat that I had made with my things and had sort of had it decorated the way I wanted it. And it took quite a lot of doing. I sort of went several times to see the house and visited. I mean, taking on the children was a separate issue because that was, you know, a wonderful challenge, I suppose, in a way. But as I say, I had such a lot of support from the Benjamin family that it was absolutely wonderful. I can remember Joe talking to the boys that we were thinking about marriage. We sort of did it very gradually, and I talked to Biff, and he was very serious, and he sort of thought about it, and then he said, "Well, Mum, if it's what you really want, it's all right with me." And then the other boys were very funny because Adam, who was only about 8 or 9, I think, he thought it was a marvellous idea. He was all sort of set to take me over and Joe could go. You know, it was nice to have a sort of woman again. It didn't last very long, but it was there at the beginning. And Mark was a little dubious, but obviously working to be nice about it. But Simon was the funniest because when Joe said to him, "Well, what would you think about it if Paul and I got married?" And Simon said, "Well, I have to reserve my judgment on that until it actually happens."
Wise old owl.
Yes.
I had enormous doubts when it all started. I was schooling at the time at a fine establishment, which was basically a hotbed of anti-Semitism.
Oh, that was handy for you as a
Very
Jew.
handy for me. Now, whilst I never actually lied about my religion, I was never asked a direct question. So I was able to just about get through. And when Dad came to me and said, "Do you have any
I can see what's coming.
any views of him marrying Paul?" I actually thought my life was ending. I couldn't think of anything worse than perhaps Dad, as well as having brought me up vaguely in a Jewish or with a Jewish background, to then be handed a black side of the family, because sort of after the Jews, the blacks were just about the next on the hate list at my school. But funnily enough, you know, it strengthens you. It really does. And I've got an awful lot out of having been involved with Paul and Biff and Gail and the other side of what is now my family, which I never would have got with Mum, Dad and my 2 brothers. So it's been very positive from that side. But at the time, isn't it? Well, I think I was 13 when the marriage was proposed. I really thought, the world was just caving in on me. I could not understand what I'd done to A, be Jewish, B, lose my mother, and then have a black stepmother thrust upon me.
I'm sorry to laugh. I'm laughing because you are.
I can laugh now. As a 13-year-old, it was fairly traumatic.
Devastating. You were at what, 11 when your mother died, Simon?
Yeah.
Was it immediately very traumatic, do you think, or did you sort of shift it aside as a child might?
No, immediately it was devastating. I remember sort of rushing off when I first got the news, and I have a memory still of locking myself in the pantry as it was. I don't know how long I stayed there, but that was the first time. Then I was just starting a new school, and questions were asked. There were forms to fill in: parents' name, mother's name, father's name. And of course, I was leaving something blank. And it was reinforced every time a new form had to be filled in, so it was fairly unpleasant for a young child. I think it's unpleasant for anybody to lose anyone, but I think young children at that age, it affects them more.
I don't know how you cope in a way, because as an adult you know how to cope, roughly speaking, because you can grieve. But can a child grieve? Because where do they go to grieve?
We didn't actually grieve. I don't think I actually started grieving until probably I was about 30.
You did then?
I've started grieving recently, the last sort of 5 years probably.
Really?
Which has probably helped, because obviously in between that time there was an awful lot of, well, just grieving that hadn't come out, a lot of sadness, which if you don't get rid of, becomes a shroud over you, and it does affect you.
You carry it. In fact, I mean, it's no wonder really that your father didn't talk about it too then, isn't it? Because he couldn't probably push you either. He didn't want to make it any worse for you, the children, I suppose.
And I think obviously he was carrying his own grief. It wouldn't have been easy for him. In fact, now, I mean, look, as an adult, I can look at what Dad did when he lost his wife and continued to bring up 3 kids. I'm full of admiration now, but as an 11, 12, 13-year-old, I thought he was just basically doing what he's meant to do. He was going out at sort of 6 o'clock in the morning to work, coming back, working a full day, putting us all to bed, doing the fatherly duties, trying to do some of the motherly duties, with 3 kids, all of whom were reacting in completely different ways. And he did a marvellous job, but at the time, little kids just, you expect everything to be done for you, and it was done.
And if you want to have them, I'll frighten you.
He's very much into the battered baby look at the moment, because he's
but you assure me he's done it himself.
We tried to pretend, in a sense, if only subconsciously, that nothing had happened, that life went on, as it did, of course. But it did mean that I think in retrospect, that we feel that we didn't recognise the event sufficiently.
Do you think, Joe, that you kind of deliberately protected the boys from it then?
Yes, I think we did. My wife and I talked about it with them before she died, because she'd been ill for quite a long time. And we worked out what we would do in the event of her dying. Literally on the day that she died, so they all went to school as usual. And I think that we may have made some mistakes along the way, but that's essentially what we did. And what we'd agreed.
Did you organise them in a different way from, say, how your wife had?
Yes, we all had a specific task to do, which we changed week by week, so that they had that different experience.
Yeah.
I think it worked very well, actually. I mean, given that there wasn't a woman in the house to play the woman's role, as it were, the mother, we got all of the jobs done. And we're all here, as it were, to tell the tale as a relatively sane family unit. Yes, Paul came along afterwards and injected a more feminine approach into the family.
I think we concentrated on the job in hand, and the job in hand was keeping the household going, doing the jobs that needed doing, and keeping ourselves together. But I think, as we've all suggested, that that was where we put our energy, and in a way that certainly, I think for me, it kept us together, but it was also a kind of a difficult time for all of us. You know, at the time things happen and you don't understand, and there's no rhyme nor reason, and it's just a lot of pain, really. And yet at the same time, many things have happened that our family has since then opened out, and in many ways it's because of those events that we now have this extraordinary family.
Adam, what I'm fascinated by is the fact that your work at the moment might apply to something that you were brought up to believe in from your mother and your father. Your father in particular, because he was the great adventure playground innovator, wasn't he?
Yeah. I think there are lots of parallels between what Dad has done and what I'm doing now, although obviously it's in a very different field. But people very often look at the work that we're doing and say, you know, this is extraordinary, this is amazing, you know, what you're doing is so unusual. And amongst ourselves in the company, we feel that what we're doing is very ordinary. It's very natural to be doing what we're doing.
So what are you doing, in words of one syllable?
We're making dances,
Right.
and we're working together as collectively as a group of people, under direction, but everybody contributing and everybody working to their full potential.
How does your father's idea that you have to destroy in order to construct come into your work?
I think it's not an idea that is foreign to artists. And my mother was a painter and teacher. So where it's unusual, I think, is within working with people, and so an artist will very happily draw something, try something out, and then say, well, what happens if I tear this in half and turn it around and stick it back together again? We do that in dance. It's the same process. It's extraordinary in respect to play and to working with kids, because when kids do that, it's viewed as vandalism, or it's viewed as destructive behaviour.
Exactly, I know. And yet it does make sense, because he said to me, when I said that I was going to stop my little granddaughter jump on our sandcastle after she built it, and he said, but she'd find another shape.
Yeah.
It'd be another shape, she could build something else. But of course you protect, you as a parent, you don't think like that. Well, he did.
Yeah.
And do you feel that this was a great advantage to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think something has to be said also, which is that what Dad did was he allowed us that freedom within boundaries. So we were not allowed to dig trenches in the front room or light fires in the kitchen. We were allowed to experiment with cookery in the kitchen, but so allowing an arena, a forum where children can be destructive and creative is different from allowing that free rein to go anywhere it wishes to go.
But society could learn a thing or two, don't they? I mean, when everybody says that boring thing of we need another war to get rid of some of the aggression in people, etc., etc. In fact, your father was letting you use some part of that aggression quite normally and quite safely inside play. I was very interested in that theory.
Yeah. I think, we continue to need that. And within the dance work that we do, we work very physically. We take a lot of risks. I mean, we prepare for those risks, but I think this is an interesting thing that happens between people that are able-bodied and people that are disabled, that there's this uncertainty that exists, and both parties then become cautious. What we do is we say, okay, let's put that to one side and let's create a safe forum for us, the dance studio, where we can really extend ourselves physically and take chances. And those chances are agreed on by all the people in the company. We agree to work physically together like that. And so we are working very close to the boundaries of what's possible and what's dangerous. And we all have said we have the right to do that. We want to try that out. I'm at my best when I'm not confusing the company's work with my family, and that my family and friends, there is crossover because there are friends, the company are my friends also, but those things have to be separated out, so that I have my life outside of the company and my work and friendships within work.
When you've mentioned your father more than your mother, but you said your mother had a great interest in you too. But then she died when you were what, 9 or?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you remember that as a time? I mean, you obviously had a happy childhood up to 9, but at 9 was that a very big blow for all concerned?
For the whole family, I think. Yeah. Yeah. She was ill for, I think, 2 years before that, going into hospital, having operations. As the cancer took hold, and I think that really the whole family was devastated by that, by her death. Yeah. So.
But then, were you aware that your own father, after her death, was grieving, and that he was? I mean, how did he deal with it inside the family? It was just the one parent, wasn't it?
My memory is that he dived into work. He became. He worked and worked and worked.
But so then when Pauline came into your father's life, how did you feel about that?
I was really pleased. I think there were mixed feelings, but initially I was really pleased that he was this extraordinary, powerful, exciting, exotic woman who was kind of bowling into our household and kind of making our world bigger. I felt very much so that she was coming from North London, and the whole rest of Paul's family, this kind of huge multicoloured family that we became part of. So it was I was very pleased personally that was happening.
But were you at all scared of replacing your mother's image, so to speak, your mother's position in your life, in your heart, with another woman?
I was afraid that my connection with my mother would be forgotten. I think that's what I was afraid of.
And I think a lot of people won't acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And they think they're too guilty about it too. They don't want to find that somebody else can sort of be important to them.
I think what happened in the end was that Mum was in some ways kind of gradually kind of edged to one side, although there was always the possibility of dialogue. There was always a possibility to talk, but in fact everybody consented to silence, and I don't necessarily think it's the best thing. I think that if, as a stepchild with a deceased parent, that parent needs to be kept alive in memory and in respect in the family.
You've got to get on with the next
absolutely,
stage, haven't you?
Yeah. I think, as I say, it's a balancing act of realigning and finding a new balance and a new family. And I think that we did that. I think that the family as it now is my family. I mean, I have no concerns about that. I'm still my mother's son, and that I think something happens with stepchildren who are constantly introduced and referred to as stepchildren, that they feel less than who they are.
But when you say that, were you jealous of Pauline, though? Paul, as you call her, were you jealous because she suddenly would be taking your father's attention away from you?
No, I don't. I never kind of had that. I think she was such a great provider, and brought back the flavour of a different flavour, but the sense of big meals and an open house again, which had been for all of us had been our early experience when Mum was alive. It was a constant open house, and we had people staying all the time. We had all kinds of exotic strangers staying in our spare room. I remember one was a Zulu prince, we had a Buddhist, we had French, we had just all kinds of people staying, and the house had always been very big, and then for the interim years the house kind of closed in and got on with surviving, and then when Paul arrived, the food tasted different, but the house had opened up again, you know.
Well, now then, did it worry you at all that she was black? Because it can worry children, just because it's going to draw attention to yourself, say.
No. Quite simply, it didn't. I think, as I said, we had grown up as kids in such a mixed environment that I was pleased and proud. I think that was, you know.
What about your upbringing in terms of how it's affected your way of thinking about family life? I mean, are you a supporter of family life, for instance, or do you think that family life is overrated?
I'm a supporter of family life, definitely. What structure that takes, I feel very, very open about. I'm not a supporter of the nuclear family. If it's a healthy nuclear family, great. But my family is not like that, and it still works. So I love family life. I love it. But my family is not what most people would call a family. It's a group of people that knit together in a supportive and sometimes non-supportive way.
Without an immediate family of your own, you're not married, you haven't got children, right? Would it be too fanciful on my part, or even impertinent, to suggest that company of yours is like your family? An extension.
Yeah, I would say it's one of the things that gets in the way of me working well, is that sometimes I find myself behaving with the company as if the company is my family and not the people that I work with, and that's usually the least useful thing that I can do. On a positive aspect, that yes, we're supportive of each other, but when I begin to need to demand emotional support from the company, or not emotional support, that's not the word, but if I allow myself to think that the company is my family.
You expect too much of them?
Yeah.
You expect a lot of your family, then?
Yeah.